But joining us now to get the conservative perspective on the climate change conversation is Mark Pischea. He's a GOP strategist and the former deputy director of the National Republican Congressional Committee. So, Mark, when we look about this topic, I think that it's important to lay down a baseline first about how the United States is doing when it comes to cleaning up our air, our water, things of that nature, because oftentimes we're very much so portrayed as the bad guy. Is that the case?
Well, I think we're doing great. The issue always comes down to a difference on urgency between the left and the right. From a global leadership perspective, we're reducing emissions, we're deploying new clean energy, we are, doing the right things as a private sector, by the way, that's leading the charge. When the government gets involved, we end up in places like the Paris Climate Accord, which, then grows the size of government. It creates bureaucracy. It mandates, policies that are just anathema the way the conservatives would go about this.
And I think that that is why the Green New Deal, for example, is so controversial, is that it doesn't just necessarily affect climate change. I mean, the very name of it looks back to what FDR was trying to do, almost reinvent the way that we view things, whether it's our infrastructure, the way our economy is tied to this issue, all of these things all together. It's not necessarily just about carbon emissions, for example, but we're also now hearing that Elizabeth Sherwood Randall may be considered for the energy secretary. The New Mexico governor, Lujan Grisham, is also being possibly tapped. Well, she was asked reportedly, but then rejected the interior secretary position, according to reports. But what does this tell you about what the Biden team is looking to do when it comes to the perspective on this issue?
Well, the Biden team's got a problem on their hands, and it starts with the Green New Deal, which is a Christmas tree. It is a massive overreach, and it should be summarily rejected. Instead, conservatives need to weigh in, and conservatives need to engage on this the way we would do it. Less government, states' rights, opening up markets, let the private sector drive what the market wants. And right now, government doesn't have to be the solution, and that's the liberal perspective. If we got a problem, government will solve it. This is a problem the private sector can and should solve. And as long as we don't have, nations across the country who are significant, or across the world that are significant polluters, we're fighting an uphill battle.
And I think you bring up a really good point, and it's the idea that sometimes when we do have this debate, we don't hear the other side of the argument because there is no necessarily cohesive argument that the GOP has put together when it comes to this issue. I mean, there are, to your point, many very individual groups, nonprofits, for example, or private interest groups who do tackle this issue. But so often, too, when I talk to younger conservatives, they bring up this very point that there's not necessarily a rebuttal for many conservatives when it comes to this. So what do you think that is? Do you think it's a lack of a program? Do you think it's a lack of just a catchy slogan such as the Green New Deal? Or does there need to be a substantive conversation about what the Republican rebuttal is when it comes to the issue of climate change?
Well, I think fundamentally we meaning all of us, allowed this issue to be politicized in ways that it didn't have to be. Conservatives are opposed to the policies that the Democrats use to support the clean energy industry. We're not opposed to the clean energy industry and the massive numbers of jobs that they're creating in the country today. So, we conservatives need to understand that the politics of this have changed. America wants us involved in this conversation. America wants to hear what the right has to say. It's now our job to give it to them and engage in ways we haven't in the past because of politics.
And I think that the key word in there is innovation. Really, that's why I think what Republicans should start focusing on, understanding, for example, that when it comes to private industry, oftentimes they're the ones who are leading the front lines when it comes to these remarkable new things that could change the way that we look at energy. When we look at the way that really things that we've never challenged before could be addressed. I mean, the private industry, as you bring up, is a remarkable thing when it's free to do things that there's expertise at. I mean, if they're good at, for example, building solar, that is something that most often comes from a private industry, not necessarily government itself. So is it about making an economically feasible argument, an innovation argument? Where does this battle really take place?
Well, I will tell you, we do a lot of polling, and the public and even conservative support for conservative action on clean energy and for some people climate is real. This isn't an electoral divide. This is a grass tops political leadership divide, and we need the leadership to start sending signals to the grassroots that we're okay talking about this. And from an electoral perspective, if we can take the environment, climate, clean energy off the table and instead focus those campaigns on economics, taxes, creating jobs, that's where Republicans are going to win. So this is a huge political campaign opportunity as well to redefine campaigns the way we want them defined.
And I think that you bring up a point, too, that there are political advantages to taking that approach as well. I mean, for example, I always look at the state of Florida. I mean, it's a swing state. It's a pivotal one that you need to win, basically, in a presidential election. But that is an issue where climate change is very much so real. I mean, whether you're talking about the sea levels, whether you're talking about the algae problem in that state, it's something that conservatives see firsthand, and it does affect their lives. So Republicans can continue ignoring that if they want. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of conservatives out there who want this issue to be addressed, and I think you're right on for saying that. But Mark Pischea, it's always a pleasure having you in this program, breaking down the conservative rebuttal to this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.